Not long ago, I released an episode where I focused on an extraterrestrial or interdimensional entity by the name of Lamb that infamous British occultist Aleister Crowley had claimed to have contacted while living in a New York apartment with his then Scarlet Woman, Roddy Minor. This led a longtime friend and listener to suggest that I do an episode in which I further explore Crowley's time in New York. And that's going to be the focus of this episode. And I should note that some years ago, I did a very lengthy documentary episode on Crowley's life as a whole, and if memory serves, I do cover some of his time in New York in that one as well. Years prior to his extended stay in New York, Crowley had passed through briefly en route to Mexico. The following is from his Confessions. Full title, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley, an autohagiography. Summer was now at hand, and the wanderlust reasserted itself in me. There was no point in going back to Boleskine till the following Easter. Boleskine being the notorious manor house on the southeast side of Loch Ness which Crowley had purchased. As it happened, Mathers, MacGregor Mathers, a fellow member and Crowley's superior in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, to whom I returned to report progress, had two guests, members of the order. They had just come back from Mexico. The fancy took me to go there. I wanted in particular to climb the great volcanoes, so late in June 1900 I sailed for New York. I think it was on the 6th of July that I reached New York. In those days, one was not bored by people who had never seen a real skyline boasting of the outrage since perpetrated by the insects. A mountain skyline is nearly always noble and beautiful, being the result of natural forces acting uniformly and in conformity with law. Thus, though it is not designed, it is the embodiment of the principles which are inherent in design. New York, on the other hand, has been thrown up by a series of disconnected accidents. The vanity of the natives led them, therefore, to concentrate their enthusiasm on a rejected statue of commerce intended for the Suez Canal. This they had purchased at second hand and grandiloquently labeled Liberty Enlightening the World. They had been prophetic enough to put it on an island with its back to the mainland. But in those days, the spirit of liberty was still intensely alive in the United States. The least sensitive visitor was bound to become aware of it in a few hours. There was no genteel servility. Nobody interfered with anyone else's business or permitted busybodies to meddle with his. The people seemed prosperous and contented. They had not yet been forbidden to amuse themselves when the day's work was over. And here Crowley, an Englishman, complains about the heat he encountered. Till this time I had never been in any reputedly hot country. I was appalled to find New York intolerable. I filled a cold bath and got in and out at intervals till 11 at night, when I crawled panting through the roasting streets, and consumed ice water, iced watermelon, ice cream, and iced coffee. Good God, I said to myself, and this is merely New York. What must Mexico be like? I supposed that I was experiencing normal conditions, whereas in point of fact, I had landed at the climax of a heat wave, which killed about 100 people a day while it lasted. I only stayed in New York 2 or 3 days, and then traveled direct to Mexico City. Crowley's family owned a successful brewing company called Crowley's Alton Ales. This had allowed his father to retire early, and upon his death, leave his son a sizable fortune, a fortune which the adult Aleister squandered, leaving him struggling financially. By 1914, Crowley was reduced to relying on donations from membership dues from AA and OTO members, the AA being an esoteric order founded by Crowley. the name of which has a variety of interpretations, but one of the more common is that it's an abbreviation for Argentium Astrum or Astron Argon, both meaning silver star. The OTO, or Ordo Templi Orientis, being another magical order or secret society, one which Crowley had quickly climbed the ranks of. 2 years after his initiation, he had been granted control of the organization in England and Ireland, and given the title of Supreme and Holy King of Ireland, Iona, and all the Britons, within the sanctuary of Gnosis. In July of 1914, Crowley, a skilled and accomplished mountain climber, went climbing in the Swiss Alps. During this period, the First World War had broken out. After recuperating from a bout of phlebitis that same year, Crowley set sail for the States aboard the famed British ocean liner, the RMS Lusitania, arriving in New York in October. He moved into a hotel and began earning money writing for the American edition of Vanity Fair and taking on freelance jobs, including writing for famed astrologer Evangeline Adams. In the following from the Confessions, Crowley details leaving England for the U.S. and arranging to sell off some rare books and manuscripts for an infusion of much-needed cash. I had a feeling that my country, the richest in the world, would shortly be going cap in hand to the savages for cowries. I went to America by the Lusitania on October 24th, 1914, expecting to stay a fortnight and return with the sinews of war. It did not take me 48 hours to discover that my egg was addled. I had taken with me the equivalent of about 50 pounds in American coinage. As luck would have it, one of the first people I met in New York, Mr. D, whom I knew as a collector of rare books, paintings, and sculptures, including some of my own Introuvable publications, showed an interest in the purchase of some of my unique editions and manuscripts. I arranged to stay in New York until these could be sent over for his approval. As a matter of fact, I had understood him as offering to purchase them all outright. Money was at this time of considerable moment to me. In the upshot, he purchased between $700 and $800 worth of my goods, instead of between $3,000 and $4,000 worth, as I had expected. And this disappointment left me in great straits financially, as I had at the time no immediately available resources in England. While researching this episode, I repeatedly encountered the claim that in his diaries Crowley writes about continuing his experimentation with sex magic while in New York City via cover your ears, masturbation and engaging in sex acts with female prostitutes and male clients of Turkish bathhouses. Being familiar with Crowley, I have no trouble believing this, but I just wanted to add the caveat that after scouring his books, The Confessions, The Magical Diaries, and Diary of a Drug Fiend, I couldn't find a specific passage that clearly recounts any of this, but I could have simply missed it, or maybe the passage or passages in question are in other diaries, be they published or unpublished, that I'm unaware of. But I do know for Crowley that engaging in masturbation as well as performing other sexual acts was a standard part of the practice of ritual sex magic. The closest thing I found regarding frequenting Turkish bathhouses in New York is the following from the Confessions once again. It's relatively tame and seems to contain only passing innuendo at best. It was on October 2nd, 1919, that I first attained to this Pisgah site of the Promised Land, Parinibbana. Nibbana, I believe, being the Pali version of the Buddhist word nirvana. I was spending the night in Fleischmann's Turkish baths in New York. It was my custom in all such places to practice the 10th clause of my vow as a master of the temple, to interpret every phenomenon as a particular dealing of God with my soul, by forcing advertisements and other public announcements to yield some spiritual significance. I would either apply the Kabbalah to the words and manipulate the numbers so as to reach a state of mind in which some truth might suddenly spring in the silence, or I would play upon the words as if they were oracles, or else force the filthy falsehoods of fraudulent dollar dervishes to transfigure themselves at the touch of my talisman into mysterious messages from the masters. And I thought I had a knack for alliteration, albeit in my case usually unintentional. I did also find the following quote spoken by an actor portraying Crowley in a biographical documentary on YouTube that looks like something that probably originally aired on British television. They don't mention where the quote comes from, but it's much more salacious and on point. It very closely echoes the claims I came across online. I continued my studies on the 9th degree, using a number of prostitutes for the purpose of magical assistance. I was also in the course of my experimentation sodomized by 2 strangers in a Turkish bathhouse, and performed a small favor for another, all done in the course of magical experimentation. I would rarely indulge in sex for mere pleasure. Even in death, Crowley remains perhaps one of the most controversial figures of all time, and usually when we think of the controversy surrounding him, his involvement in magic and the occult probably come to mind. But during his time in New York, Crowley also managed to spark political controversy that would see him branded a traitor back home. As mentioned previously, the First World War had broken out. Crowley, far removed in New York, took to referring to himself as an Englishman of Irish ancestry who opposed British imperialism and thusly sympathized with the German war effort. In January of 1915, Crowley had made the acquaintance of one George Sylvester Varick, an American poet and writer working for the German Office of Propaganda in America. Varick hired Crowley to write for the propagandist paper The Fatherland, and albeit later, to edit another publication called The International. Crowley, writing under his own name as well as several aliases including the Master Therion, Baphomet, and Lord Boleskine, wrote a number of anti-British articles as well as articles on magic. In one article, he wryly lamented that a German bombing raid had missed his aunt's house and requested that Count Zeppelin try again, providing her exact address. He also praised the unrestricted use of submarine warfare on Allied shipping. On July 3rd of 1915, along with Lila Waddell, an Australian violinist who was then Crowley's Scarlet Woman, and had followed him to America, Crowley gave an anti-British speech at the foot of the Statue of Liberty and pretended to tear up his British passport. As stated previously, Crowley's actions were considered treasonous back home, and as a part of their investigation, the authorities raided the London headquarters of the OTO. Crowley, in response, tried to spin the situation, attempting to paint himself as something of a double agent, secretly trying to undermine the German war effort or propaganda machine from within. The following is from the Confessions once again, and it deals with Crowley's supposed intentions and his thoughts or view on German culture. I found myself then in New York, awaiting the arrival of my books and manuscripts, an event unfortunately as I then thought long delayed. So I bethought me whether I could not irrationally, immorally, unphilosophically, with a game leg but with all my heart and brain serve England. I was furious at the stupidity of the British propaganda. It was worse in America than it had been in England. At its best, it was an exaggeration and sheer falsehood, so transparent that Woodrow Wilson himself, to say nothing of a legion of Italian bootblacks, saw through it. As for the German propaganda, it was hardly noticeable. Was it that they did not understand the importance of America in the Wilhelmstrasse? Was it that they had the good sense to rely upon the stupidity of the English apologists to defeat their intentions? I had a considerable opinion of the intelligence